When Frank Sinatra stopped mid-song and put down his microphone, the 2,000 people at Caesar's Palace froze in their seats. On Las Vegas' Golden Stage, Old Blue Eyes was singing My Way. Spotlights illuminated him. Crystal chandeliers cast their glow over the tuxedo-clad audience. They listened in mesmerized silence. The 57-year-old Sinatra was at the peak of his career. Everything looked perfect, but in the front row, right at the foot of the stage, a 6-year-old blonde girl was crying silently. And when Frank Sinatra noticed those tears, he was about to do something he had never done in his 30-year career. That night had begun like any ordinary Vegas performance. But those tears from a little girl, they would not only confront Frank Sinatra with an unexpected truth, they would bring him face to face with the dark side of Vegas, the power of media, and one of America's most dangerous enemies. What started as entertainment would become a battle for justice, a battle that would make national headlines and change both their lives forever. In October 1973, Frank Sinatra was America's undisputed king. Caesar's Palace was his home, his kingdom, his empire. Every night he took the stage. Las Vegas would stop and listen to him. The slot machines would quiet down. The card dealers would pause mid-deal. Even the casino's constant hum, the hum of money-changing hands, would fade into background whisper. That evening was like every other. Black tuxedo tailored to perfection. White shirt crisp as fresh snow. That iconic stance. That had commanded stages for 3 decades. But Las Vegas in 1973 was more than just entertainment. It was power. It was influence. It was where America's elite came to play, where deals were made in shadows, where fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card. The venue was completely packed. Wealthy tourists from New York and Los Angeles, Hollywood stars, whose faces graced movie screens across the nation, Vegas' famous names, who controlled the flow of money through the desert city. Money, fame, prestige. Everything came together on this stage, like nowhere else in America. The audience sat in reverent silence, cocktails balanced on small tables, cigarette smoke curling upward. Through the stage lights, women wore their finest jewels, men their most expensive suits. This wasn't just a concert, it was a ritual, a gathering of America's powerful, a moment where the entertainment capital of the world showed its true face. Frank had opened the concert with his energetic classics. The venue had erupted in thunderous applause. After each song, his voice, still strong at 57, filled every corner of the massive showroom. The orchestra, perfectly rehearsed, followed his every gesture, his every breath. Everything was under control, orchestrated, like a symphony of power and performance. But in the front row, right beneath the stage, where the spotlight's glare met the darkness of the audience, sat a 6-year-old girl, a girl who didn't belong to this world of wealth and glamour. Emma Morrison, blonde hair that caught the stage lights, blue eyes. That reflected something deeper than the glittering chandeliers above. Pink dress, that was clean, but clearly not expensive. Next to her sat a tired-looking middle-aged woman, her mother, Sarah Morrison. Both their outfits were more modest than everyone else's in the venue, their posture more uncertain, their presence somehow fragile in this temple of excess. When Frank transitioned to My Way, the venue held its collective breath. This was the evening's climax, the song that had become his signature, his anthem, his declaration. Every person in that room knew the words. "And now the end is near," he began. But as the words filled the air, Emma's chin trembled. Something in those lyrics reached a place locked away for months. The first tear rolled down her cheek. Frank continued, "And so I faced the final curtain." Emma's tears multiplied. Her small shoulders shook. The song that celebrated strength was breaking her heart. Her mother whispered urgently. Emma shook her head, unable to stop the flood My Way had unleashed. When Frank reached the climax, "I did it my way," his eyes swept the audience. But this time, they stopped. They caught the girl, caught her tears, caught her pain. Something inside the professional flickered. His microphone hand paused. Frank Sinatra, performer for presidents, commanded stages worldwide, thrown off rhythm by a 6-year-old's tears. What happened next had never occurred. In the decades-long history of Caesar's Palace Entertainment, Frank raised his hand, cutting through the soaring melody. He silenced the orchestra with a gesture that sent confusion rippling through the professional musicians. He lowered the microphone, breaking the spell that had held the audience captive. 2,000 heads turned simultaneously, following Frank's gaze to the front row. Whispers began to circulate. Was this part of the show? Had something gone wrong? In the history of Vegas entertainment, stars didn't stop mid-performance. They didn't break character. They certainly didn't acknowledge crying children in the audience. "Wait a minute," said Frank, his voice carrying across the now silent venue, with an authority that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with genuine human concern. He looked directly at the little girl in the front row. "Little lady, why are you crying?" The venue became so quiet that even the air conditioning system could be heard humming in the background. Waiters stopped moving. Bartenders paused mid-pour. Security guards stood frozen, unsure whether this was an emergency or an unprecedented moment of spontaneity from the normally controlled entertainer. But when that little girl opened her mouth, what she would say would not only confront Frank Sinatra with a truth he had never considered before that night, it would set in motion a chain of events that would bring down one of Nevada's most powerful families, challenge the very foundation of America's justice system, and turn a simple Vegas concert into a national crusade for truth. And the man who thought he had seen everything in his 57 years of life was about to discover that the most powerful performance of his career wouldn't be sung, it would be lived. Emma stood up through her tears. Her small frame was illuminated by the stage lights that suddenly seemed too bright, too intense for such a young soul, carrying such heavy burdens. Her mother reached out, trying to hold her arm, but Emma had found something inside herself, a courage that even she didn't understand. She began moving toward the stage, each step taking her further from the safety of anonymity and closer to a moment that would define both her childhood and Frank Sinatra's legacy. Security officers, positioned throughout the venue, stepped forward instinctively. This was Caesar's Palace. Order was maintained. Protocols were followed. Audience members did not approach the stage, especially children, especially during performances. But Frank raised his hand again, this time to stop the security team. Something in the little girl's movement, something in her determined gait, despite her tears, told him this was not a moment for protocol. The 6-year-old girl, taking small but determined steps, came to the edge of that magnificent stage. 2,000 pairs of eyes were on her now. Wealthy socialites, Hollywood executives, casino owners, politicians, all watching as a child in a modest pink dress prepared to speak her truth to one of the most powerful men in entertainment. But she was only looking at Frank, only seeing the man who had become, in her young mind, a symbol of the strength her father had told her to find. "Little lady, come up on stage," said Frank, his voice gentle, but carrying to every corner of the vast showroom. "Tell me why you're crying." Emma stepped onto the stage, her small shoes making soft sounds on the polished floor where legends had performed. Frank knelt down, bringing himself to her level, bringing the microphone to where her voice could be heard, not just by him, but by everyone who needed to witness what was about to happen. The gesture was simple, but its impact was profound. Here was Frank Sinatra, at the height of his power and fame, kneeling before a child, making himself vulnerable, making himself equal to her pain. "Why are you crying, sweetheart?" Frank asked, his voice carrying a tenderness that the audience had never heard from him before. Emma gathered her voice, drawing on reserves of strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Because the last time I was here, I was with my daddy." Frank's carefully controlled expression shifted. This wasn't what he had expected. "Last time, 6 months ago," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she found her courage. "Daddy brought me here. You sang the same songs. You wore the same black suit. Daddy was so happy that night. He kept saying, "Emma, look at Frank Sinatra. See how strong he is? See how he never gives up?" The audience leaned forward, drawn into a story they hadn't expected to hear. Emma's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "Daddy said you were his hero. He said that someday, when I grew up, I should be strong like you. He said no matter what happened in life, I should always stand tall and fight for what's right." Frank felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't just a child's admiration. This was about something deeper, something that connected to the very message he had been singing about all his life. Then 2 weeks after we came to see you, Emma's small hands clenched into fists, her body drawing on every ounce of determination her 6 years had taught her. "The police came to our house. They took Daddy away. They said he killed a man." A ripple of shock moved through the audience. This was not entertainment anymore. This was real life crashing into their world of make-believe and luxury. "But Daddy didn't kill anyone," Emma's voice rose, carrying across the silent venue with the force of absolute conviction. "He's a good man. He works hard. He takes care of me and Mommy. We were just poor and couldn't afford a good lawyer like the rich people." Frank took a step back, not from fear, but from the sheer force of truth this little girl was speaking. In his 57 years, he had seen corruption, had dealt with powerful people who bent rules and bought justice. But he had never had it presented to him so starkly, so honestly, by someone so pure. Emma continued, her voice trembling but determined. "Daddy worked in construction. He built buildings, made them strong and safe. The day they said he did the bad thing, he was at the park with me. We were feeding ducks and playing on the swings. I remember because he promised to take me for ice cream after." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word from this child, who was laying bare the failures of their system of justice. But the rich man who really did the bad thing, he hired lots of lawyers, expensive ones in fancy suits. Our lawyer was young and nice, but he didn't know how to fight the rich people's lies. Frank's breathing grew heavier. This wasn't just a story about one man's injustice. This was about a system that protected wealth and abandoned the innocent. "Daddy writes me letters from prison," Emma said, her eyes brightening slightly despite her tears. "Every single week, he sends me a letter, and in every letter, he tells me the same thing. Be strong like Frank Sinatra, Emma. You're my little warrior. Don't let anyone break your spirit." She looked directly at Frank, her blue eyes meeting his with an intensity that seemed impossible from someone so young. "But I don't feel strong anymore, Mr. Sinatra. I don't know how to be a warrior when my daddy's locked up for something he didn't do. I don't know how to be strong when everyone at school calls me names and says my daddy is a bad man." And at that moment, something fundamental shifted in Frank Sinatra's soul. Because this little girl wasn't just telling him her story. She was holding up a mirror to everything he claimed to believe in. Strength, independence, fighting for what's right. And in that mirror, Frank saw not the powerful entertainer who sang about doing things his way, but a man who had spent decades performing strength while avoiding the real battles that mattered. This 6-year-old child was challenging him to be the man his songs claimed he was. And what Frank Sinatra decided to do next would determine not just Emma's fate, but the very meaning of his own legacy. Frank stood up slowly, his mind racing through decades of carefully managed public appearances, calculated responses, and professional distance from real-world problems. He took the microphone and turned to face the 2,000 people who represented everything he had spent his career entertaining: the wealthy, the powerful, the privileged. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying a weight it had never held before. "Tonight I was supposed to entertain you. I was supposed to sing my song, tell some jokes, make you forget your troubles for a couple of hours." The audience waited, unsure where this was going. "But this little girl has reminded me of something I almost forgot," Frank continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Music isn't just about entertainment. It's about truth. And sometimes, the most important truth comes from the most unexpected places." He looked down at Emma, then back at the audience. This child's father has become a victim of a system that protects wealth and abandons justice. And tonight, I'm not just Frank Sinatra, the entertainer. Tonight, I'm Frank Sinatra, the man. And this man is going to do something about it. Frank turned back to Emma. Sweetheart, what's your father's name? Robert Morrison, Emma said, her voice carrying a glimmer of hope for the first time that evening. Frank nodded solemnly. Emma Morrison, I want you to look at me. I want you to hear these words and remember them forever. The venue was so quiet that his whisper carried to the back rows. I promise you, on this stage, in front of all these people, that I will not rest until your father comes home. I will use every resource I have, every connection I've made, every favor I'm owed, to make sure justice is served. It was a promise no entertainer should make, a commitment no performer should undertake, a vow that would put Frank Sinatra's reputation, his safety, and his career on the line. But as Emma's face lit up with hope, for the first time in months, Frank knew he had no choice. The man who had sung about doing things his way was finally about to find out what that really meant. The next morning, America woke up to headlines that shook the entertainment world. The Las Vegas Tribune blazed across newsstands. Sinatra rebels against injustice on stage. The Nevada Journal proclaimed, Old Blue Eye's new mission, fighting for the forgotten. Entertainment Weekly questioned, has Sinatra gone too far? But it was the reaction from Nevada's power structure that revealed just how dangerous Frank's promise had been. Nevada Business Times columnist Marcus Wellington, known as the mouthpiece for the state's banking and casino interests, published a scathing attack. Frank Sinatra has apparently confused himself with a crusading attorney instead of the song and dance man he actually is. The justice system is a complex institution that requires years of study and professional expertise to understand. It is not something that can be fixed by celebrity grandstanding and emotional appeals. Perhaps Mr. Sinatra should stick to what he knows, entertaining tourists and staying out of matters that are beyond his comprehension. The message was clear. Know your place, stay in your lane, don't challenge the system that has made you wealthy and famous. While Frank sat in his penthouse suite at Caesar's Palace, having his morning coffee, reading the newspaper coverage of the previous night's events, his assistant knocked on the door with obvious concern. Mr. Sinatra, we've received some unusual correspondence this morning. The first letter bore the official stamp of Nevada State Prison. Inside, the message was brief, but chilling. Sinatra, you don't know what you're getting into. The Morrison case goes deeper than you think. Rich friends can't protect you from everything. Back off while you still can. Stop interfering or face consequences. You've been warned. The second letter was even more direct. Leave Emma Morrison alone. Some stories are better left untold. Some injustices are necessary to maintain order. Your concert was entertainment. Don't make it more than that. Frank read the letters twice. His jaw tightened with each word. He had dealt with intimidation before. The music business wasn't known for gentle persuasion. But these threats felt different. They felt institutional, backed by the kind of power that could make problems disappear. He walked to the window, looking out over the Las Vegas Strip, a city that had been his kingdom for so many years. Down below, Las Vegas pulsed with money and ambition, with dreams and broken promises. And somewhere, in this desert metropolis, forces were already moving to make sure Frank Sinatra learned the cost of challenging the established order. But when he thought about Emma, about her tear-stained face, about the faith she had placed in his strength, Frank Sinatra made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't backing down. Frank's first call was to his lawyer, Charlie Breslin, a man who had navigated the treacherous waters of Nevada politics and business for 2 decades. Charlie, I need you to dig deep into the Robert Morrison case. I mean deep. I want to know everything about the victim, the investigation, the prosecution, and especially about who benefits from Morrison being locked up. Charlie's voice carried the weariness of a man who had seen too much. Frank, I've already started preliminary research based on last night's performance. What I'm finding isn't good. The murdered man, Vincent Caruso, wasn't just some random businessman. He was connected to construction contracts worth millions. And the man who looks like the real killer? Tell me. Thomas Whitman, Caruso's business partner. But Frank, the Whitman family, they're untouchable in this state. What do you mean untouchable? Charlie took a deep breath. Thomas Whitman's father, Robert Whitman Sr., owns the largest bank in Nevada. He has loans out to half the casinos on the Strip, including some that are very close to you. He's financed political campaigns for governors, senators, judges. His family doesn't just have money, Frank. They have institutional power. Frank felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about defending an innocent man. This was about taking on a family that had spent decades weaving themselves into the very fabric of Nevada's power structure. There's more, Charlie continued. Whitman Sr. sits on the board of the Nevada prison system. His law firm represents the state in wrongful conviction appeals. He has financial interests in keeping the prison population stable and the justice system, let's say, efficient rather than accurate. The scope of the corruption was breathtaking. The Whitmans hadn't just committed a crime. They had built a system where their crimes would be protected and innocent people like Robert Morrison would be sacrificed to maintain their power. While Frank was uncovering the depth of the conspiracy against Robert Morrison, Emma was fighting her own battles. At Lincoln Elementary School, word spread quickly about her father's case and Frank Sinatra's involvement. What began as whispers soon became open taunting. Children who had once been her friends crossed to the other side of the hallway. When they saw her coming, during recess, Emma stood alone, while groups of children pointed and whispered. Emma Morrison's daddy killed someone. My mom says Frank Sinatra is crazy for helping killers. Killer's daughter. Killer's daughter. The cruelty of children, amplified by the fear and prejudice of their parents, became Emma's daily torment. Teacher, unsure how to handle the situation, and pressured by school administrators, who were receiving calls from influential parents, began to treat Emma with a cold distance. A distance that hurt almost as much as the open hostility. Sarah Morrison watched her daughter withdraw a little more with each passing day. The bright, cheerful child, who had bravely walked onto the stage at Caesar's Palace, was slowly being crushed by isolation and systematic harassment. When Sarah finally called Frank to tell him what was happening, his voice hardened. This ends now. I don't care who these people think they are. Nobody terrorizes a 6-year-old child on my watch. 3 days after the concert, Charlie called with devastating news. Frank, we have a serious problem. The Morrison case has been fast-tracked for final appeal. Normally, these things take years to work through the system, but somehow Morrison's case has been expedited. What does that mean? It means we have exactly 30 days to find new evidence. That proves his innocence. 30 days, Frank. If we can't produce concrete proof, that clears Morrison and identifies the real killer. He'll be transferred to maximum security prison for life. No more appeals. No more chances. Frank felt the weight of his promise to Emma crashing down on him. 30 days is to take on one of the most powerful families in Nevada. 30 days to unravel a conspiracy. That had been years in the making. 30 days to prove that Frank Sinatra was more than just an entertainer playing at heroism. Charlie, who expedited the case? That's the worst part, Frank. The order came from Judge Harrison Webb. And guess whose campaign for election was heavily financed by Whitman Sr.'s bank. The system wasn't just corrupt, it was working overtime to bury Robert Morrison and make an example of anyone foolish enough to challenge it. But what Frank didn't know was that Thomas Whitman had been monitoring every move, tracking every phone call, and preparing a counterattack that would target not just Frank's reputation, but Emma's safety. The Whitman family had survived decades of Nevada politics by eliminating threats before they became dangerous, and they were about to teach Frank Sinatra that some enemies fought back harder than he had ever imagined. Because in 22 days, when all seemed lost, and Emma's father faced a lifetime behind bars, a mysterious witness would emerge from the shadows with evidence so explosive it would bring down not just Thomas Whitman, but the entire network of corruption that had protected him. And Frank Sinatra would learn that sometimes the most important performance of your life happens not on stage, but in the courtroom, where justice hangs in the balance. The final scene rewritten. Years later, Emma became a lawyer, not because of inspiration or heroic dreams, but because she understood how easily the system could break people who couldn't afford to fight back. She opened the Morrison-Sinatra Legal Foundation in a modest office building, far from the gleaming towers, where expensive attorneys protected wealthy clients. The work was harder than she had imagined. For every Robert Morrison she freed, there were dozens more still trapped behind bars. The victories were small, often Pyrrhic, and the defeats haunted her sleep. Some nights, she would sit in her office until dawn, reading case files of people who reminded her of her father, people whose only crime was being poor when they needed justice most. Frank visited her office once, unannounced, 3 years before he died. He was older, quieter, carrying the weight of battles that never made headlines. They sat across from each other, without speaking for several minutes. Two people who understood that winning one fight hadn't changed the nature of the war. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked, not looking at him directly. Frank considered the question. His career had shifted after that night. Some doors had closed. Some friends had become strangers. The threats had eventually stopped, but the wariness never did. "No," he said finally, "but I understand now why most people don't." Emma nodded. She had learned the same lesson. Justice wasn't a destination you reached. It was a burden you carried, one case at a time, knowing that the system you fought against would outlive you both. When Frank died in 1998, Emma stood at his funeral, not as a symbol of triumph, but as someone who had shared the exhaustion of fighting powerful people who preferred the world stay broken. She didn't cry. She had learned, long ago, that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in a courtroom. Caesar's Palace eventually installed a small bronze plaque near the showroom entrance. Most people walked past it without reading it. Those who did and found the words oddly unsettling. October 1973, the night Frank Sinatra stopped singing. Emma visited the plaque once, 5 years after Frank's death. She stood there for a moment, remembering her 6-year-old self, walking onto that stage, believing that speaking the truth would fix everything. She turned and walked away, understanding, finally, that the real victory hadn't been saving her father. It had been learning that some fights never end. They just find different people willing to carry them forward. The casino noise swallowed her footsteps as she disappeared into the crowd. Another person carrying someone else's battle. One more day into a war that had no winners, only survivors. This story has ended, but the feeling it left behind may still linger. If you'd like to discover stories like this together, you can subscribe to the channel.